end tonight with two ingenious solutions to Florida's ongoing battles with wild reptiles.
Predator becomes prey in the Florida Everglades as hundreds of hunters descend on the Sunshine State to catch and kill as many Burmese pythons as possible.
Florida's wild heart was mocked for its boldest move yet, unleashing hundreds of rare snake hunters into a land already drowning in serpents.
Just check 2 of our transmitted females.
Okay.
What began as a desperate act of survival would soon transform ridicule into awe and restore balance nature itself had lost. The silent invasion. For centuries, Florida's wilderness pulsed with life, swamps humming with insects, forests echoing with birds, and predators moving through a fragile but perfect rhythm. But beneath the calm, something foreign was stirring, a quiet force that would soon choke the heart of the Everglades. It began innocently enough. In the late 20th century, Burmese pythons, imported from Southeast Asia as exotic pets, slipped from glass tanks into the wild. Some escaped during hurricanes, others were abandoned by overwhelmed owners. What seemed like a few harmless releases turned into an invasion that no one could stop. The Everglades became the perfect refuge. Warm winters, endless wetlands, and an abundance of prey allowed the pythons to thrive. Hidden under roots and reeds, they bred in silence. Each clutch of eggs multiplied the threat, each hatchling another link in a growing chain of destruction. By the early 2000s, Florida's wilderness was changing. Marsh rabbits vanished. Raccoons and opossums disappeared from once busy trails. Even deer fell prey to the massive coils that tightened around the ecosystem. Where the swamps once echoed with life, a haunting quiet began to spread, the kind that signals an ecosystem on the brink. The Burmese python had become Florida's new apex predator, powerful, relentless, and untouchable. And as scientists raced to understand the scale of the crisis, it became clear that the natural order had collapsed. Florida was losing its wild soul, and soon the world would mock its most desperate attempt to fight back. The collapse of the wild. At first, the warning signs came quietly. Fewer footprints in the mud, fewer eyes reflecting from headlights along the levees. But when researchers began comparing data, the truth was staggering. Entire species were vanishing in silence. Studies between 2003 and 2011 revealed numbers that stunned the scientific world. In areas overrun by pythons, raccoons had declined by more than 99%. Opossums, almost completely gone. Bobcats had fallen by nearly 90%. Marsh rabbits and foxes disappeared entirely. The Everglades, once called one of the most diverse ecosystems on Earth, had become a graveyard of missing life. This wasn't a slow fade. It was collapse. Every creature lost sent ripples through the food web. Birds that fed on insects vanished. Seeds once scattered by small mammals lay buried and forgotten. Even disease patterns changed, as the balance that kept rodents and parasites in check dissolved. The python didn't just devour animals, it devoured balance. And with each tightening coil, Florida slipped further from recovery. Desperate to restore what had been lost, scientists tried every method imaginable: traps, trackers, bounties, even thermal drones. But none could match a predator that could hide in a puddle and wait motionless for days. By the time the state realized it couldn't kill its way out of the problem, another idea began to surface. One so strange, so audacious, that it would make Florida a global punchline before it became a symbol of ecological redemption. Florida's desperate gamble. In the face of an invasion no human plan could stop, Florida turned to nature itself for an answer. The proposal sounded absurd: to release more snakes into a land already drowning in them. When wildlife officials announced they would reintroduce hundreds of eastern indigo snakes, the reaction was instant and brutal. News anchors smirked. Headlines screamed, "Florida fights. Snakes with snakes." Memes spread across social media, mocking the idea as another wild Florida experiment gone wrong. But behind the laughter was something most people didn't understand. The eastern indigo snake wasn't another invasive threat. It was Florida's forgotten guardian, a native giant that once kept venomous and invasive snakes in check before vanishing from the landscape. This wasn't a reckless stunt. It was a last, carefully calculated move, a gamble based not on desperation, but on faith in the ecosystem's own design. Scientists hoped that restoring this lost predator might finally tip the scales back toward balance. While the world laughed, Florida's biologists quietly began one of the most ambitious rewilding efforts in the nation's history. The goal wasn't to fight chaos with chaos. It was to bring back the one creature capable of restoring order. And it all began with the return of a legend. The return of the indigo snake. The eastern indigo snake was unlike anything else in Florida's wild places. Stretching more than 8 feet long, its scales shimmered with a deep blue-black sheen, as if sunlight itself bent around it. It moved silently with calm precision, radiating the kind of authority only nature's oldest predators possess. Unlike venomous snakes, the indigo relied on strength, not poison. It was immune to venom, capable of hunting and devouring rattlesnakes, copperheads, and coral snakes without hesitation. Where other creatures fled from the rattle of warning tales, the indigo advanced, unbothered, deliberate, unstoppable. But for all its power, it posed no threat to humans. Shy and elusive, it avoided conflict, existing as a quiet regulator of balance, until people, not predators, brought it to the edge of extinction. Decades of logging had erased 90 million acres of longleaf pine forests, the indigo's natural home. Highways sliced through what remained, killing countless snakes as they tried to cross. The pet trade took what the roads didn't. Collectors drawn to its gleaming skin captured thousands from the wild. By the late 1970s, the species was declared endangered, and its role in nature faded into memory. Florida had once lost its guardian. Now it was ready to bring it back. A history of extinction and hope. The fall of the indigo snake was never sudden. It was a slow unraveling. Generation by generation, its world was carved apart. Where longleaf pines once stretched endlessly across the south, only fragments remained. About 3% of their former range. The indigo depended on those forests, and on the burrows of the gopher tortoise for shelter and breeding. As both vanished, so did the snake. By the late 20th century, the species was nearly gone from Florida. What had once ruled the forest floor became a ghost. Conservationists called it irreplaceable, but few believed it could ever return. Then, against all odds, hope began to flicker. A handful of biologists and conservation groups, including the Oriane Center for Indigo Conservation, refused to let the species fade into legend. They began breeding indigos in captivity, not for display, but for release. Every egg that hatched became a quiet act of defiance against extinction. Years of planning followed. Researchers studied soil, temperature, and prey density to find the one place that could sustain the indigo's comeback. They chose a rare, protected stretch of wilderness, the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve. Here, in secret, the first generation of young indigos waited behind mesh and glass, growing strong enough to face the wild again. Florida's gamble was about to begin. Releasing the Guardians. In 2017, the project finally took shape. Deep within the Oriane Center for Indigo Conservation, dozens of young snakes hatched under the glow of laboratory lights. Each one was part of a plan to return a vanished predator to its rightful place in the wild. For 2 years, they were raised behind mesh and glass, carefully fed, monitored, and measured. Every slither and strike was recorded to ensure they were strong enough to survive what awaited them beyond captivity. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about precision, patience, and faith that nature could still heal itself. When the time came, biologists carried them into the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve, a rare sanctuary of longleaf pine and winding ravines untouched by development. One by one, the snakes slid from gloved hands into the grass, dark, gleaming, and free again. Each release carried the weight of centuries of loss and the hope of a fragile new beginning. In 2024 alone, 41 indigo snakes, 22 females, and 19 males joined the wild. More than 200 would follow. But as the young snakes disappeared into the undergrowth, doubt lingered. Could a few hundred snakes really undo decades of ecological collapse? Or Was this just another noble idea destined to vanish in the swamp's silence? The world didn't know it yet, but nature was already preparing its answer. Nature strikes back. For years, skepticism hung over the Everglades like morning fog. Many believed the reintroduced snakes would disappear, just as their ancestors had. But the indigo was built for survival. Once set free, it began reclaiming its lost kingdom, quietly, efficiently, and without human applause. Where venomous snakes had multiplied unchecked, indigos began to hunt again. They moved through tall grass and underbrush like living shadows, tracking rattlesnakes, cottonmouths, and coral snakes with calm precision. Immune to venom, they overpowered their prey and swallowed them whole. And they didn't stop there. Indigos also targeted rodents, especially the cotton rat, a creature whose booming population had damaged crops and spread disease. With each kill, the balance shifted slightly back toward harmony. Then came the discovery that stunned even the researchers. Indigos were hunting young Burmese pythons. These hatchlings, still small and vulnerable, had never faced a natural predator in Florida before. But against the indigo, they had no chance. It was as if nature had written its own countermeasure, an ancient species rising from near extinction to confront the invader that had unmade its home. Farmers began to notice fewer venomous snakes slithering through their fields. Hikers and rangers reported seeing small mammals return to areas long thought empty. For the first time in decades, Florida's wild rhythm, fragile, imperfect, but alive, began to stir again. The world that once mocked the plan was now watching in disbelief. Florida's gamble was working. Signs of victory. For a long time, scientists didn't celebrate. They waited. Reintroduction projects rarely succeed, and survival alone isn't proof of recovery. What they needed was the ultimate sign that the indigo snake had not just returned, but was living again as part of the wild. That proof finally came in 2023. Deep within the pine forests of North Florida, researchers stumbled upon two hatchlings, small, sleek, and unmistakably wild-born indigo snakes. They weren't from captivity. They were the offspring of the very snakes Florida had released years earlier. It was the first confirmed natural birth in more than 4 decades. For the conservationists who had devoted years to this mission, it was a moment of quiet triumph, evidence that their work had rewritten the odds. Soon after, the ripple of hope spread beyond Florida. Alabama followed suit, releasing hundreds of indigos into the Conacuh National Forest. There, too, success came. In 2019, a single baby indigo snake was found crawling through the leaves, the first seen in the state in 60 years. The restoration had moved from theory to reality. What began as a ridiculed experiment had become a living model for how ecosystems could heal when given a second chance. The laughter had faded. In its place, the forests were whispering something else: renewal. Florida's bold gamble began as a joke and ended as a lesson. The indigo snake, once forgotten, became a symbol of nature's resilience, proof that even the most mocked ideas can restore what's been lost when humanity finally chooses to work with the wild, not against it.